You're tuned into the Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Zeno Pucks. Here are your hosts, Andy and Brian Matusi.
Welcome back to the Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast presented by Zeno Pucks. Brian and Andy here with you again. Our last show of the year. Today is December 30th, 2024. And this year is, at least in my eyes, with everything that's gone on, kind of been a blur. But we'll get to that more towards the end of the show. Andrew, how are you doing?
Not bad, man. It's kind of weird that we're wrapping up 24 already. So,
yep, like I said, it just all feels like a blur. But we'll talk about life at the end of this. We got some hockey to get to. Let's just jump right into it with Detroit Red Wings. They fired their coach Derek Lalonde, bring in Todd McLellan, and then they promptly follow that up by getting cleaned up by the Toronto Maple Leafs, which wasn't a great first look for them, but they come back, have a great game against Washington last night, I believe that was. And so they kind of righted the ship there. I don't want to say righted the ship because it was one game, but they rebounded again. It's hard to judge a coach's first game with the team. McLellan was, irate in practice the next day. So it seems like they kind of got it a little more together and had a good showing against Washington. But Detroit, as it sits right now, 14-8-4, 32 points, tied for last in the Atlantic Division. That's unfortunately for them. Also tied for last in the conference with the Buffalo Sabres. So definitely not where Detroit wants to be. Definitely not where I think anybody expected them to be to start this season. But again, we're in January. It's going to be by the time they play their next game, it'll be January. I don't believe they play tomorrow. But essentially, we're at the turn of the calendar year. This is basically the point where your season either gets better now or it's a lost cause. I mean, famously, the St. Louis Blues 5 years ago, dead last on January 1st, and then come all the way back, and they win the Stanley Cup. Not saying the expectations for Detroit are the same here, but a coaching change now is, I guess, better. It's better now than never.
One thing I want to point out real quick is you were incorrect. They do play tomorrow against Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay. There's another team that's actually Pittsburgh's been playing pretty well for the most part lately, but.
One thing I did want to say is that I'm really eating my words, much as I have been with Washington and my preseason predictions. I'm eating my words with the Detroit preseason prediction too, because I said I think they're really close to figuring it out, and I have been very wrong thus far. So, whoops. Guess I should just stop making preseason predictions.
Well, it's funny because, and we weren't the only show to do this, but at the top of this season, everyone's like, all right, one of Ottawa or Detroit or Buffalo needs to take the step this year. Well, Buffalo has very obviously been a nightmare. Detroit's really had a really rough season with a horrible goal differential right now too. Ottawa's had a really bad start to the season, and they've actually kind of rallied the troops a little bit lately to squeeze into a playoff spot. Right now, I believe they are in the second wild card. And so of those three teams, I didn't think Ottawa would be in the top. I thought, I think I was with you at the start of the season. I think I was Detroit, or maybe I was Buffalo. I know I was really high on Buffalo at the top of the year because of their young players like Power and Dahlin, and I just thought with a back end that seemed as stout as theirs was, and kind of the rise of Devin Levi, which he's kind of been up and down this season as well. I thought Buffalo would maybe do a little better, but we reached the point with all three of these teams now where it's kind of shit or get off the pot, and I think Detroit really. I think you make a coaching change like this, I think you really have some kind of belief that there's more to this team that just hasn't been accessed by the coach you had. And so I'm interested to see where they go from here. I'm interested to see what they do at the deadline, depending on what position they're in. But I'm really fascinated with the Red Wings right now. And I like McLellan as a coach. I know there's mixed reviews of him out there. But we'll see how it goes for Detroit. I really can't envision it being worse than what they've had in Lalonde all these years.
Well, to your point about them, like they're having to be more there than what we've seen, I wholeheartedly believe that. And that's just solely based off the push they made at the very end of the season last year. They looked like a playoff team the way they were trying to play, or the way they were playing to just try and make the playoffs. It was insane. That was some of the best hockey you could ever watch. So the talent's there. It's just what's it taking to get this out of them? What does it take to get the team to perform to the level they're capable of performing at? And I mean, you could argue, yeah, well, obviously the coaching change was needed for them, but is that the sole issue, or is there something else?
Right. And truthfully, again, I think first of all, I think you're right. But the way they played to finish last season, I think definitely gave most people serious reason to believe that this team could come right back and kind of jump into the playoff picture this year. I want to share something with you that's oddly fascinating. I don't want to say fascinating because that's not the right word. But the Red Wings came over to the Eastern Conference at the start of the 2013-14 season from the West during the divisional realignments. And they have not won a playoff round since joining the Eastern Conference. Their last playoff round win was in 2013. It was their final year in the Western Conference. They won in round one and then lost in round two to, I believe, Chicago, who ended up winning the cup that year. And since then, they made the playoffs in 14, 15, and 16, lost in the first round all three times, and then have missed the playoff every single year since 2016. So Detroit, a team with a deep-rooted fan base, a passionate fan base, showed that they were right on the cusp of getting back in last season. This is the time to turn it around now. I really hope they can get it turned around. I think this league is better when the original six teams are in the playoffs. And to have Detroit and Montreal, for that matter, since they're next to each other in the standings, be this bad, I just think is not good for the league. And you could say the same of Chicago out west and in the Western Conference as well. Dead last in the conference, dead last in the league is Chicago. So,
Well, here's excuse me. My thing is there's talent on this team. You've got Lucas Raymond, you've got Moritz Seider, you've got Showtime on there. You know he's on the tail end of his career, but he's still a dangerous weapon. He's still best American-born hockey player.
yep.
So I mean, it's not like they're lacking weapons on this team. The tools are there. It's just how they utilize them is what they need to figure out.
Yeah, and that's fair. And hopefully, again, hopefully McClellan can unlock that next gear for the Red Wings. But we'll check in with them in a couple months at the deadline and kind of see how it's panned out. Obviously, we can't judge it based off of 2 games under his coaching, and they've won one and lost one. You can't really go off of much with that, but anything I think will be better than how it was going there with Derek Lalonde. So big change in Detroit, but hopefully better things on the horizon for them.
I sure as hell hope so.
All right, now let's move on here, and we're going to stay in the Atlantic and talk about the race for this division and its 3 playoff spots. It's really started to heat up, and now a lot of that has come on the shoulders of Tampa Bay and Ottawa, who both had probably not the starts to the year that they would have liked. Boston, much the same way, really a slow start. Those 3 teams kind of coming to life the last month or so. And now, again, all 3 of those teams are in a playoff spot, the Bruins, the Lightning, and Senators. But it seems that the top spot in the division, unless there's some drastic change over the next couple of months, it really seems like Florida and Toronto are going to be gunning for that. Toronto is obviously a really good regular season team pretty much every year the last few years. But Florida, defending Cup champs, they're kind of about where we'd expect them to be right now. Again, tied for first in the division. So, I mean, everything's going right there, but this looks like where it mostly seemed like it was a division that had 2 good teams, and the 3rd spot would go to whoever else. Now
Whoever was the least shitty.
Exactly. Now it seems like this is a division where there's 5 teams who can all compete, and the Bruins are 2 points up on Tampa Bay, but have played 4 more games. I assume Tampa can probably bridge that gap over any of those 4 games, but again, this is going to be a pretty tight race. I don't think Toronto or Florida will fall out of that 1 and 2 spot, but that 3rd spot will be very much up for grabs, and that'll obviously leave a tight race for that, and as well as the wild card spots. Unless something drastic changes, it doesn't really seem like the Metro is bringing a wild card team this year. I mean, both New York teams are now, the Rangers are dead last in the Metro division. That's depressing.
Yeah.
But both New York teams, the Flyers and the Jackets and the Penguins to a lesser extent, because they started playing very well lately. It just doesn't seem like there's enough gas for any of those teams to steal a wild card spot. I know we're still only just about halfway through the year, but we're to the point in the season now where you pretty much know what a team is going to be the rest of the way. And so where I think the Atlantic has all these teams that are very competitive, it seems like the Metro is the polar opposite of that. Where it seems like they're bringing 3 teams because those are the rules. Now, the 3 teams in the Metro that are in the playoff spots right now, all very good teams, New Jersey, Washington, Carolina, all teams that are worthy of those spots, but very clearly after that, there is a bit of a drop.
Yeah, and I have to point out, I've mentioned this on the show before, Carolina is always a great regular season team. And then come playoff time, it's like it looks like they just lose. I don't know if they lose momentum or if they just get burnt out so fast, but I just never see them as a cup contender, no matter what, when playoffs roll around. So,
well, and that's why I maybe this is unfair, but that's why I really don't give them the time of day on this show too much. I said it last year after they were eliminated, is I'm done taking this team seriously until they either make the finals or win the cup, because I'm tired of them being pretenders every year. It's just, you expect the same thing. You expect a semi-deep playoff run, and then they collapse because they can't beat the actual good teams like the Rangers. Well, last year, not the Rangers this year, and the Panthers. And in 2019, they go to the conference final against the Bruins and just get smashed to pieces. So until they make the finals, I'm not even giving them the time of day, because it's the same thing like with the Leafs in the first round, as good as that squad is. Until they start making a deep playoff run, it's not even worth wasting breath on, because you pretty much know where it's headed every season.
yeah, but like you said, or what we're talking about right now, regular season, they're great. 3rd spot in the Metro. But like you said, everything, I mean, it immediately drops off after that. I mean, you you go down this list. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to laugh, but it's funny to me. You go down this list in the Metro, and what do we have here? Pittsburgh, Columbus. The fact that the Rangers are last in the Metropolitan and the Columbus Blue Jackets are 5th is wild to me.
Now, for what it's worth, it's a 3-point spread between the teams, but the Rangers have played 2 fewer games. But on the opposite side of that, you are right in the fact that why are we even having a conversation about the Rangers being in the same neighborhood as the Jackets when they were a millennium ahead of them last season? So yes, that while the Rangers could close that gap and jump back in this race very quickly, the fact that they are where they are is just depressing. They're now 2-8 in their last 10, including 3 losses in a row coming into today.
Well, that's what's weird to me. You go from last year at one point being cup favorites to absolute bottom of the barrel, like backwash right now. It's insane to me. And that's not what I think of when I think of the New York Rangers.
No, it's weird to see them that far down the standings.
So Philly's about where I would expect them to be. The Islanders, I feel like they're hit or miss. Columbus is exceeding expectations right now. I got to give them credit. They looked really good against the Bruins the other night. Not when they lost, but when they beat them 6-2.
Yeah.
But part of that was because the Bruins looked like ass against Columbus. So the Bruins are just so wishy-washy right now. It's hard for me to even comment on them as a fan, just because it's so back and forth with them right now. I can't even stay focused on them.
Yep, that's fair. And for Columbus too, they're in just such an odd position. And we kind of knew it with what happened in the offseason, that it would be just kind of an odd year, but it's really hard to get a read on the Jackets right now. I mean, they are exceeding expectations, I would say, for the most part. They're almost at Gary Bettman 500, which is the same amount of wins as regulation losses, because Gary does his stupid loser point for this league.
Yeah.
So they're almost at Bettman 500. They're 15, 16, and 6, probably a little higher where, compared to what people thought they'd be. Now, if you look on ESPN.com, it shows they're 3-4-3 in their last 10. But again, that's 6 points in a 10-game span for a team that's still rebuilding. That's, I would say, pretty damn good. You take what you can get when you're in those positions. So I do want to corral this, kind of bring it back in and go back to the Atlantic where this started, though, and talk about, we briefly mentioned it because we talked about Carolina, and I mentioned with Toronto. They're such a good regular season team, but it's not worth wasting the breath on them until they do something in the playoffs. But I also want to take a look at a team like Not Florida. We expect them. They're defending Stanley Cup champions. We know they can make a deep playoff run. They've done it 2 years in a row now. They've been to the finals. I would expect more of the same this year. But I want to talk about Boston and Tampa Bay and Ottawa to a lesser extent because I don't want to get too deep on them until we know they're going to make it. But you mentioned with the Bruins, you've had a hard time kind of deciding what you think this team is this year. And I guess to lead off of that, what are your expectations for them, assuming they make it into the playoffs? Because I assume based on where they're at, they seem like they've righted the ship enough to at least get into the playoffs. I don't think that'll be an issue, but do you think this shakeup will help them come playoff time, having a new coach and not having Montgomery after the two cataclysmic losses they've had the last 2 years? Do you think it'll be more of the same? Where are you at?
Well, the first thing I want to lead off with is I still am aggressively against the fact that they fired Jim Montgomery. And I know we spoke earlier in the season about, oh, his seat's really hot right now, but Jim Montgomery was never the issue. And you can go look at his record with the Bruins to prove that. And maybe it was just to give the wake up call to the players. And I think it, like you mentioned, it's kind of, I don't want to say they've righted the ship because I still don't feel that way, but it's enough to get them in a playoff position right now. If they keep playing like they are right now, though, my expectation is first round exit, no question, probably 5 games. It's just frustrating because this is a team that still has good talent on it. You still have Charlie McAvoy, you have Brad Marchand, you have David Pastrnak, you have Charlie Coyle. You have these good players on your team. Jeremy Swayman theoretically should be an exceptional goaltender and has just not been. That being said, they also have Jonas Korpisalo as their backup, who is a career. What's a good word for him? Well, he's a backup. Yeah, he's a career backup. That's what he. And there's nothing wrong with that if you are. Like I'm not dogging him for that, but I'm just saying he's not. You're never going to have a tandem like that. Theoretically, like you had with Ullmark and Swayman. I mean, that's like a once in a lifetime tandem right there. So we'll probably never see that on the Bruins again. But in theory, Jeremy Swayman should still be performing exceptionally well. He's not. I think that's a big part of it. I think him missing training camp negatively affected him big time. And it shows. But I've heard people arguing that he's good enough that training camp wouldn't affect him. And I think that's a bullshit take for any player, not just a goalie, not just Jeremy Swayman. That's why they have training camp, is to keep you in peak condition. And missing that has its effects on you once the regular season starts. So I think that's a bullshit take to say that missing training camp didn't affect him.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Especially for goalies, these guys are such creatures of habit. They're like pitchers in baseball. They all got their routine. Everything's, they're just very, a lot of these guys are really superstitious. So missing anything can really throw off a goalie's routine. And if you ask Swayman, he probably wouldn't tell you that because, he'd be probably the first one to say, look, I just need to be better. It's as simple as that. But it's hard to deny when, you miss all of training camp, all of preseason. Your first action was game 2 or 3 of the season. Like, it's very, very easy to see that he has suffered, at least to some extent, from not being in training camp. But for the Bruins, I think another thing that's killed them, and it strangely doesn't get talked about enough, but and not that there's an easy fix to this, but you lose David Krejci to retirement, Patrice Bergeron to retirement. You lose 2 Hall of Fame, at least Bergie for sure, but 2 Hall of Fame worthy centers, and you replace them with Pavel Zacha, who I've never been high on ever.
Correct.
And now, I mean, Charlie Coyle can play down the middle, but now Elias Lindholm as well. And I don't see it there with Lindholm. Really hasn't been outstanding for them. I think they thought they'd get a little more shutdown play out of Zadorov. It really doesn't seem like that's there. I've actually seen some Bruins fans in their Facebook comments talking about how much of a mess he is. Haven't watched enough Bruins games to know that for sure, but
I can confirm that.
But ultimately, while you're right, there is good talent there. McAvoy and Pastrnak obviously lead the charge there on the front and the back ends of it. But I think this team will only go as far as their centers will take them. And I think, again, it's not easy to replace a guy like Patrice Bergeron, who was probably the best 2-way center of all time. But and maybe that's very biased because he was my favorite player, but man, is it really hard to argue against that. But again, even if you argue against that, there's no arguing against the fact that losing a center of that caliber has drastic long-term effects on a team, and the Bruins largely had done nothing to address it as far as drafting quality centers over the last decade or so. I mean, they famously had 3 picks in a row and passed on Matt Barzal all 3 times.
Yeah.
I mean, the only good center they brought in the last 10 years is Charlie Coyle, who it seems like gets relegated to the wing a lot. So,
well, here's the other thing I want to point out real quick. The Bruins, and you've already kind of touched on it, but I'm just going to be blunt with it. The Bruins draft like absolute shit, and they have for at least the last 8-9 years.
Yeah, and there have been some good picks in there, part of it is some of them were slam dunk picks, but like a great example was David Pastrnak. They drafted him 25th overall in 2014. If you redrafted that draft, he's probably one of the top 3 picks. He's an outstanding player. He's got an unbelievable shot. He's got great skill. He's a great skater. He's just a great guy. He's well loved by his team. I mean, that's a slam dunk pick that they got late in the first round because he wasn't really on a lot of teams' radar. 2016, they draft Charlie McAvoy again. Probably a pretty easy pick. Wasn't super highly, I don't want to say wasn't highly touted for his class, but wasn't top 10 worthy at the time. Again, you redraft that group, he probably is in the top 10, maybe top 5, depending on how far your biases go. But that's 2 really good players over a 10-year span. That's just not good enough. I mean, they've had other guys that they've drafted pan out well. Like I think as time goes on, I think Johnny Beecher will start to slowly work his way up the lineup for them. I think he's got a lot more to give. When they picked him, I thought that was a good pick for them way back when. But after 2-3 years of him not doing anything with the big club, I'm like, well, maybe this kid just fell flat on his face. Well, then last year, I think even the year before, he comes in and he's actually pretty good. I think as this kid gets more ice time, he'll be good for the Bruins. But I think you hit it right on the head. They haven't drafted well enough to keep themselves in a position where they can make deep playoff runs because they don't have Bergeron, they don't have Krejci.
And that's one thing that I think this team, I've said it so many times on here now, I don't care what anybody says, this team is still struggling trying to find a replacement for Patrice Bergeron, and you're never going to find. Here's my thing. If they're trying to find somebody of the same caliber as Patrice Bergeron, then they're never going to be fulfilled because it's not going to happen.
Correct.
And anybody that is even close is already on a different team. So you need to find a way to spread that talent more efficiently throughout the entirety of the team as opposed to just focusing on one position. Patrice Bergeron, again, I used this term earlier, but once in a lifetime player. And like you mentioned, best 2-way forward of all time. That shouldn't even be up for debate, first of all. Second of all, the amount of I would argue he was probably the most respected player around the NHL while he was an active player.
Yep.
So I think that's just something that absolutely, for lack of a better term, kicked this team in the nads. And it's just something that's extremely hard to recover from. And I don't want to knock Brad Marchand because I know Marshy. I don't know him personally, obviously, but he is a good dude. He is a good leader, and he's a very talented hockey player. But to go from Patrice Bergeron to almost anybody else, it's going to be a step down, and that's just the way it is. And I think it affected Marshy too, because him and Bergie were best friends too. So that's chemistry that's gone from the locker room now.
Yeah, it's.
Oh, I know what else I was going to say. And I know I'm not going to get dragged for this, at least not by Bruins fans, because I've seen everybody else saying the same shit, so I know we're all on the same page. Don Sweeney needs to fucking go. That's problem number one.
That was going to be my next thing I asked.
Yes.
So we talked about how bad the team is drafted. The same guy's been at the controls for about a decade now.
He sucks, man. Honestly, you want my honest opinion, that is the problem with the Bruins right now, is the front office. It's not the players, it's not the coach. I think the fact that Sweeney fired Montgomery blows my mind. And, I was talking to an NHL connection that we have. I won't mention their name, but they pretty much said to me, and I couldn't have worded it any better, Don Sweeney is lucky he's in tight with the Jacobs family, which is true. It's the only reason he has a job right now. And it's it's infuriating at this point. He is pretty much tanking this team, whether it's intentional or not. I really don't think he is. I just don't think he's competent enough.
Well, I don't think it's intentional, especially if he's good friends with ownership. I think all he wants is for the team to be good. I just think he's not good enough to be the guy to do it. I mean, Bruins fans famously dogged on Peter Chiarelli the last 2-3 years. He was the GM of the team. And I get where they're coming from, but I'll tell you what, that's the guy that built the team that won the Stanley Cup. And I know part of it was from before his time because he didn't draft Berge and Krejci and all this, but he assembled. He was the one that had the mind to plug in the pieces where they were missing to put together a Stanley Cup winner. And so people can dog on him all he wants, but he got the results. Sweeney had a lot of the same pieces left, though. I don't want to say a lot of the same pieces, but he had that tight core together still. He still had Raskis as goalie. He still had Berge. He still had Krejci. He still
all
had
those guys in their prime.
He had Marchand coming. Marchand was great. He had Pasternak coming up, McAvoy coming up, Carlo coming up. Who else was good on the Bruins Cup final team? Matt Grzelcyk. He had a lot of these young guys already coming through the system, and he couldn't do what Chiarelli did. He couldn't plug in the missing pieces in free agency in the trade market to put together a cup winner. Now, granted, they were very close in 2019. I don't want to take away the fact that he put together a team that made it to Game 7 of the final, because that's not fair. But other than that season, what have they done? I mean, I can think of a large amount of first-round exits. The series against the Maple Leafs, not standing because there's just some bad juju for the Leafs against the Bruins. But other than that, they've gotten stomped by Tampa twice. They've gotten stomped by Florida twice. So maybe it's just a South Florida thing they can't handle, or a Florida thing that they just can't handle. But
dude, here's the thing.
Other than the Cup final year, they haven't done jack shit with under this guy.
No, and you and I can agree they should have won that Cup final. It's inexcusable that they didn't.
Yeah.
But I'll stay. I don't want to be the guy that lives in the past. But one thing that still really irks me is how hard they choked against Florida in the first round. Not this past, but in the 2023 season.
That's inexcusable.
And that really pissed me off. And I'm a Pan. Don't get me wrong. I love the Florida Panthers just about as much as I love the Boston Bruins. And so there's no bad blood towards Florida for me, obviously. But it still enrages me that they choked as hard as they did. They choked that. They had a 3-1 series lead and they choked that whole thing away and then lose it in Game 7 at home in overtime. That just pissed me off.
Yeah, that's fair.
Especially with the season they had that year. Again, that was a team that is as close to looking like the 2019 team as possible. I would argue that team was better than the 2019 team. And I think that's another thing that pissed me off is they just choked it away.
All right. I was going to say, let's all exhale now.
Dude, I could talk about the Bruins for hours.
It's been something I felt like we needed to do for a while because they've just kind of been in no man's land for a while. And as a fan of the team, I figured you could best address it. I want to move on now and talk about a team that has been in similar situations as the Bruins, but have gotten over the hump, won a couple Stanley Cups, and is now in a position like the Bruins are where, okay, what are you? Tampa Bay, I think, is in a position where they are much better suited for a deep playoff run, potentially a Stanley Cup run. They've already done it twice with this group, minus now Stamkos. But again, Tampa Bay had a really rough start to the year. Now they're going again. They're 7-3 in their last 10. I believe they are tied for the best goal differential, tied for the second best goal differential in the league with Washington. Only Winnipeg's got a higher goal differential. They're at plus 37 right now is Tampa Bay. And Andrei Vasilevsky has been great lately. He's on the season. He's a .914 save percentage, a .239 goals against average. Pretty good numbers, about what we would expect from Vasilevsky. Obviously, he makes his money in the playoffs with with the Stanley Cup runs that they had. And so now Tampa's in a position where it's looking like the Bruins, probably a lock for the playoffs, even if they're playing 600, 650, 700 hockey the rest of the way. I think they're both teams that are better than 500. But if they just play with some strong stretches of hockey the rest of the way. I think they can pretty much coast into the playoffs. But now you look at them and say, okay, you don't have Stamkos. That does change the chemistry around the room a little bit, but the team as a whole is about as good as the ones that won the Stanley Cup. The only difference is everyone's older. Do you think they have enough in the tank to make a deep run, but making a deep run when they're going to have matchups against teams like Florida and Toronto and, you know, these teams in the Metro like Jersey and, dare I say, Carolina? You know, do they have enough in the tank to still compete to that level?
I think my answer is going to surprise you. I think Tampa's a sleeping giant, and I think they're a very dangerous team, and it's kind of like everything's building up and building up slowly right now, and eventually it's just going to explode. And I think they'll. I have no doubt that they will pass Boston. I think if Boston makes the playoffs this year, it's in a wild card spot, and Tampa's finishing in third. I don't think they're going to get. They're going to pass Florida or Toronto in the standings. The top two spots are going to be Florida and Toronto, not necessarily that order. But I definitely think Tampa's got it. And I think come playoff time, we're going to see a different animal than what we're seeing right now. I think it's just a matter of time till they kick it into high gear.
I hope so. I mean, I certainly think you're not far off by saying that they really could. Look, they had a lot of deep playoff runs in a row. I think a couple of years of some earlier exits will probably do them some good in the rest department when it comes to playoff time this year. If they get high, yeah, buckle up. I mean, Andrei Vasilevsky is in his prime right now.
Yes.
He's as good as he'll ever be, I would say. And I mean, he's already won 2 cups. But look, man, I would not be upset if we had a 7-game Battle of Florida with all 7 games going to 3 overtimes each. I think we could be in for some incredible hockey. And I think you pretty much hit it right on the nose with saying that they're a sleeping giant, because this team, yeah, they're fourth in their division right now, but I think you're probably right in saying that they'll pass Boston. They could pass Florida. You never know. And even Toronto as well. I mean, they've won the division before, so who's to say they can't now? But
correct. But I just, dude, I think I just don't think they're going to have a chance to catch Florida, Toronto, because I think they're just going to be too. I think Florida, Toronto stay where they're at.
yeah, once it's playoff time, though, I'm really excited to see what this team can bring. Now that they've had a couple of years where they've been early exits, you get a lot longer summer, give your body a chance to fully recover, you know, maybe get in some more off-season workouts to work on, you know, specific things you need to practice, whatever that may be for them. I don't know. But obviously they're incredibly well coached. John Cooper is just an outstanding coach. So I don't think there's an issue there. It's a guy that knows how to win. He's done it plenty of times. He's been to 4 Stanley Cup finals as a coach. Obviously all with this core, again, now minus Stamkos, but he's had Kucherov around forever. He's had Hedman around forever. Vasilevsky was there for their first run in 2015. He was just so young then. He was only, he was like 21 years old or something. He's behind Ben Bishop, but he did play in that final when Bishop went down with his weird injuries he was having.
Correct.
Ben Bishop was such an odd goalie.
Yeah, that was like, he was never a goalie I was ever like concerned about.
He was just huge. They called him Big Ben for a reason. He's 6'7". He was just a guy built like a brick shit house, and it was hard to get the puck around him. He was so big. But Vasilevsky's a big guy too, 6'4", 220. He's not a small guy, but again, he's been around for all this winning that Tampa Bay's done. He's been with the group for a while. A couple guys have been there a long time. Again, they bring back McDonough, who was there as well during their runs. So
I think their most powerful.
Go ahead.
I would say I think their most powerful weapon, when you take a step back and look at the team on paper, you take away all those absolute offensive juggernauts they have on that team. Take that away. They still have Andrei Vasilevsky, and when that man is on, you're not putting anything past him. So I think if they could kick it into high gear, I don't think anyone's going to stop them.
That'll be a good one. When we do our playoff brackets, I'll be excited to see where your thoughts are still at on them. But I think, you pretty much hit it right on the head with where I was going to go with this. Was that this might be a team that's waiting for somebody to try fucking with them in the playoffs, and then they're going to go on a heater and have like a 16-6 run in the playoffs and win it all again. So we'll keep our eyes on Tampa. But yeah, this Atlantic division is going to be a fun one to watch the rest of the way, as it seems like there's 5 teams in here that have a legitimate shot to all be playoff teams, and there's 3 that certainly don't seem like that, but we'll address that later on. So before we move on, I want to, because we're going to go in a way different direction now. I want you to have a chance to talk about the Warrior for Life Fund.
All right, I'm going to keep it short this week. Plus, everybody, I do know that talking about them is paying off because I see other people talking about them, so that's nice. But for those of you who don't know, the Warrior for Life Fund are a nonprofit organization that, through the game of hockey, help military service members and their families transition back into civilian life, whether they're coming home from deployment or if they're getting out of the military and becoming civilians again. They kind of help alleviate the stressors of all that. Through the game of hockey, they have their own team they're called the Warrior for Life All-Stars. Different military veterans, they go around, they play games all over the country, and each game is a memorial game for a fallen veteran. They've partnered with the Boston Bruins Alumni Association and the National Hockey League as well to do some really cool stuff. They did a really cool event back at the beginning of this month at the Warrior Ice Arena, which is the practice facility of the Boston Bruins. They played against the Bruins alumni team, and the team was the 2011 Stanley Cup champion Boston Bruins lineup. So that was really cool. So they do a lot of good. It's obviously not something that's financially easy for them to do. So if you have any interest in helping them out at all, you can head over to warriorforlifefund.org and make a donation today. It's hockey season, and you're looking to work on your stick handling or maybe even your shot, but ice time just isn't an option for you right now. Luckily, our buddies over at Xenopucks have got you covered. They've developed an elite off-ice practice puck that, in addition to looking like the real thing, is the same size and weight as a regulation hockey puck to give you that authentic feel on the end of your stick. It works better than other off-ice practice pucks on almost any surface, whether you use it on hardwood, carpet, concrete, or even asphalt. Xenopucks glide like a real puck on ice. So if you're looking to improve your game without setting foot on the ice, head over to www.xenopucks.com and get yourself a puck. Check out their merch selection and be sure to follow them on Instagram at Xenopucks.
All right, sweet. Let's talk about the Colorado Avalanche again. They always seem to find a way to make it into our show. And I think we could probably just make this a Colorado Avalanche themed show at this point.
Dude,
with how much
we
talk
should.
about them, but
Although it's usually never good.
I would say for the most part, it's never been good. And this time it's two good things they've done. So
yes.
Colorado, let's talk about the smaller one first. They go out and they get Juuso Parssinen from Nashville. It seems like the Avs and the Predators really have this they really just love trading with each other. It's like four big trades, or not big trades, but four notable trades they've made with each other in the last couple of years. I think of the Sam Girard trade. I think of this trade. I think of the Scott Wedgwood trade. Like nothing groundbreaking, but certainly notable additions to teams. The Girard trade was I would say a pretty big deal.
Oh, absolutely.
But Colorado, I mean, is always. It seems like they're always improving the team, and you know what? Parssinen is a player I still think that has a ton of high upside. He's 23 years old, but I saw him play a lot in the American League in Milwaukee. He's a really talented player, really good hands, pretty good shot. He hasn't done a ton in the NHL this year. 5 points in how many games? Sorry for the bad radio here. Let's see, 5 points in 15 games, but again, it's been in a depth role with Nashville this season, who's been terrible this year. So it's kind of a tough scale to put him against, but I like the move for Colorado because they bring in a guy that's going to be able to jump in anywhere in the lineup. The Avalanche have had a ton of injury problems this season, so I think it's better to play it safe than sorry. You bring in a guy that you know can play at the NHL, that you know he can play at the NHL level. It's just a matter of what level of play you're getting out of him. But for a team that's been battling injuries all season long, I think this is a perfect addition. You don't break the bank to do it. Again, this is still such a young player where under the right system, he could develop and flourish into something great. I've seen flashes of this kid of just pure brilliance. His playmaking and his shooting abilities are unbelievable at their best. And so I think this has a chance to work out really well for the Avs. But again, even if it doesn't, if this guy can slot in and play 30, 40 games for them, that's might be exactly what they need him for. So good on the Avs. It's a good pickup. Nashville, I don't know what the fuck they're doing at this point. I don't think anybody does.
Barry Trotz certainly doesn't.
Yeah, it's just weird. Barry Trotz the coach versus Barry Trotz the GM. I mean, with how the summer went with getting all the big names, it seemed like this is a slam dunk. But now that he's in a spot where the team isn't playing well, he's like, well, now what? But which I can sympathize with a little bit, because I think if anybody in their right mind this summer went out and signed Stamkos and Marchessault and Brady Shea, I think they'd probably be like, all right, well, this will pretty much go on autopilot and take care of itself. And it has done the exact opposite. So
See,
I don't really know where the Avs go from here, or the Avs. Sorry, I don't know where the Predators go from here, or if they're going to start shipping pieces out to start a rebuild, or just at least punt on this season and move what they can move to bring in some picks. But we'll talk about the Preds a different day, because again, I want to do a proper segment on them when you and I can really see what they've become like towards the end of the season.
Oh, well, I would say honestly, at this point, we could do a full episode on them.
We could, but again, I want to see.
We don't need to, but
well, yeah, I'm sure we could, honestly. But I want to see how it looks when we get to the trade deadline. See what they've shipped off. See where they're at in the standings. I don't envision this improving too much. It kind of seems like they've reached the point where they're like, well, this is what we are this year. It ain't pretty, but it's here, and so we can dissect them a little more. But until we see more trades or moves or changes in the standings, I don't want to dive too far into them. I do want to bring this back to the Avalanche again. We mentioned this is a great pickup for them with Parson and high upside. The other thing that's going well for them lately now has been the goaltending since the trades for Wedgwood and for Blackwood. The Avs now the other day announcing that they've extended Mackenzie Blackwood for 5 more years at $5.25 million a year. Look, if his play stays the way it has been since he joined the team, this is going to be a sweetheart deal for the Avalanche, a team that on paper has always just been a good goalie away from being a cup favorite. And so if he continues to even be league average, Blackwood that is, I think this is going to be an incredible deal for the Avalanche, and I think this could result in a couple more Stanley Cups on their shelf.
Lightning, Avalanche, Stanley Cup final rematch.
I'd pay to see that. That'd be a good one.
Honestly, that was a great cup final.
It was a great final. It really was. That was one of the, and I remember saying this to my wife and one of our friends at the time when we were watching this series. It truly felt like that final was legitimately number 1 and number 2, the best teams in the league, no doubt about it.
100% yes.
And I, to an extent, felt that way with the Oilers and the Panthers this past season. Not as much on the Oilers side, despite them making the finals and having the best player in the league. I just felt like if Demko was in net for the Canucks, that they were probably the better team overall. But still, that final between Colorado and Tampa Bay was just fantastic. I would not complain if we had that again.
No, I wouldn't either. And I mean, full transparency going into it, I really thought Tampa was going to three-peat that year.
I'm glad they didn't. I was ready to see someone new, and I was tired of the unnecessary Nathan McKinnon slander. It was just it's much of what the Oilers and Connor McDavid get now, and until they win it all, that's going to keep happening. But I was so glad to see the Avs win that cup despite them being a divisional rival. It felt like one of those necessary things in the league where the superstars got to get that win on their resume. By the way, Nathan McKinnon, first place in the NHL in points right now, 60 points, 14 goals, 46 assists, which just sound like video game numbers.
That does.
Thankfully, any hockey fan well-versed enough to listen to our show probably already knows he's the leading scorer in the league, but you don't need us to tell you how good he is. But every time you look at this kid, it's impressive. He's only 29 too, which is unbelievable.
Is he really? I thought he was older than that.
No, he's 29. But he's just an incredible hockey player. Very lucky to have somebody so good at this game in this league, who seems to be just playing at a higher and higher level each year. I mean, he's 60 points in 37 games. He's not quite at a 2-point a game mark, but he's definitely over 1.5 a game.
Since we're talking about phenomenal hockey players and goals and assists, primarily assists, I think there's one very important name in hockey that we need to shout out right now. And
Sidney Crosby.
It is Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, he's we'll come back to the Avs in a sec. For what it's worth, I actually had his tab pulled up on ESPN.com. Sid this year, 40 points in 38 games. Sid has just turned 37 this last offseason, and he's still scoring over a point a game. You always kind of think of these guys when they get older, like, all right, they're going to start slowing down, and it's just natural, and it is what it is. The numbers kind of have some regression, and it's okay. It's part of life. Not for Sid though. This 37 and he's over a point a game. The Penguins are still going through the motions right now, trying to figure out what the fuck they're going to be. But nothing seems to phase Sidney Crosby ever. He's just an incredibly gifted, consistent player.
There's that. I also want to point out last night he scored was his 1,034th assist to pass Mario Lemieux for the most assists all time by a Pittsburgh Penguin.
Yeah, and I think he's only about 60 points off of being the Penguins' all-time leading scorer, goals and assists combined, that is. And so, again, we've talked about it on this show. There's no question this guy's a first ballot Hall of Famer. Is he worth waiving the 3-year waiting period for? Possibly.
I say yes, but
all that aside, regardless of who the player is, any guy that's 37 years old that's scoring over a point a game is worth talking about. It's just when you see that it's Sid, it's just one more thing to add to a resume of an already incredible player. So good for Sid, and hopefully the Pens can get their shit together and put one last good playoff run together with their 3 OGs they have on their team. Malkin, Crosby, and Letang. So we'll see what happens. But yes, definitely worth mentioning Sidney Crosby. And of course, we mentioned him in the same breath as Nathan McKinnon, both Cole Harbor, Nova Scotia natives.
Oh shit! Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yep. So,
but we digress. I just wanted to make sure we got that in there.
Yep. So we'll bring it back to the Avalanche here. Look, again, we've just mentioned how good McKinnon's been scoring. The team, yes, they've dealt with some injury issues this year, but if you look at them in the standings, they're right on Minnesota's tail. They're 4 points back of them, but they're 8-2 in their last 10 games. They've won 4 in a row now. The goaltending's just, while it's been just an issue for them all season since they brought in Blackwood and Wedgwood, it's been a non-factor now. This team is starting to play like an unstoppable force. And I don't know that there's any immovable objects in the league that can stand up to them if they're getting goaltending. I just don't. It doesn't seem like it. Even when they had Darcy Kemper and he was a 905, nobody could beat them. If they can get somebody that's a 915 or a 920, I don't think there's anything that can stop them. And that includes the Jets. That includes, Minnesota and Dallas, and maybe Vegas can go toe to toe with them. By the way, Vegas Golden Knights 9-1 in their last 10, winners of 6 in a row. I just noticed that on ESPN.com as well. So we expect that of Vegas too, but Colorado is in this part of the season now where it's like, okay, you're winning all these games. Now the expectation immediately goes back to you need to be the team that wins the Stanley Cup or it's a failed season.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And it's always tough to see a team win the Stanley Cup and then bounce in the first round the following season. Although I guess most people don't feel that as hard as LA Kings fans who won the cup in 14 and then didn't even make the playoffs the following season.
LA Kings still have not won a playoff round since their last Stanley Cup victory.
Yeah, that's that. There you go.
Them and Chicago both have neither of them has won a single playoff round since their last Stanley Cup victory, which good for them. They won Stanley Cups. LA won 2 with their group. Chicago won 3 with theirs. So, nothing upsetting there from a fan standpoint. But again, now we're a decade removed from that. It's time to shit or get off the pot. LA's more than 10 years removed from theirs. Chicago obviously not going to do anything this year as far as winning a cup. So these teams are
from theirs.
Yeah, a decade removed from winning the Stanley Cup, and now for both of them, a decade removed from winning a round in the playoffs.
Yeah, dude, that's rough.
Yeah, and I think you're right though. With Colorado, it was tough to watch it win the Stanley Cup and then get bounced in the first round, and then get bounced. What was it, the second round this past season?
Yeah,
but both times it was mostly on the shoulders of the goaltending. I really didn't think they played Seattle that great in their series versus them, but against Dallas, that was a team where Jake Ottinger was just so much better than Forgiev was ever going to be. So,
yeah.
And it is what it is. Jake Ottinger's an incredible goalie, so it's not that I expect him to take a step back. But for Colorado now, again, if they can have Blackwood be a 9-15 or a 9-20 on the season, it's really hard to envision anybody beating them. Except now that I see at Vegas, who is 25-8-3 on the year, 9-1 in their last 10 games, and won 6 in a row. They just are an absolute horse right now. Aiden Hill's been playing considerably better, and obviously they're getting scoring all over their lineup. So good for Vegas. They've really turned their shit around too. After what they would probably tell you was not the start they wanted to the year, but now they're all systems go. And it seems like Colorado. I would love a Colorado Vegas Western Conference final. That would be one for the ages.
Dude, that would be a bloodbath.
So,
man, the thing is, if you get a series like that, whoever comes out on top of that series isn't winning the Stanley Cup. Yeah, because they're going to be too banged up, man. They're going to beat the shit out of each other in that series.
Well, and that worked well for Colorado in 2022. They make the conference finals and clobber the Oilers in 4 games, and then they go on to the Stanley Cup final pretty well rested, and they hold out against Tampa Bay and win that in 6. So, I know we've kind of gone on various paths with the Avalanche, but the long and short of it is that they've got a goalie playing consistent now. If he stays where he's at or improves by any margin, I think this team instantly is at least the favorite to win the West between them and Vegas.
Say that last part again. You cut out for like a half a second.
Oh, I was just saying that between them and Vegas, one of these two is probably the favorite to win the West.
Yeah.
Assuming Colorado's goaltending stays where it's at or gets even better. It's hard to see a world where it's not them or Vegas standing on top of the conference in June.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately time will tell, but my thing with Vegas is when the day comes that they are eventually not good. Yeah, their fan base is going to be a bunch of miserable, aggressive people, for lack of a better term. I was going to say, I got to choose my words carefully here. But because they've only known success since he's been in the league 8 years, and they've been good every year. This team has only known, or these fans have only known hockey success. So when the day comes that the Knights suck, they're going to be pretty miserable, and they're going to be miserable to deal with. I can tell you that right now.
Well, if they have their way, it'll never come. I don't think there's a first round pick they won't ship out to get the guys they need. But you know what? That's a different conversation for a different day. They're a good team, but yeah, I think we'll move on from there. I think that's a good ending point. But again, it was worth mentioning. I know we talked about it at length last time, but with the extension to Blackwood and a little bit larger sample size, I think it's very obvious where this is headed with them. Before we go, 2 more things I want to get to. The last hockey thing is this. Alex Ovechkin returns from injury 40 days after breaking his leg. Comes back, picks up an empty net goal and a win versus the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then picks up goal number 870 yesterday against the Detroit Red Wings. He's now 25 goals away from holding the all-time NHL goal scoring record. This is just delightful. We all wondered what would happen with Ovi with his injury. Would he come back? How would he be? 2 games into that return, he's got 2 goals on the board. I don't think that's a pace that's sustainable, obviously, but if he's even, 3 goals in 5 game spans, he'll have the record by the end of the year. So yeah, this is exciting. I don't want to say anything and put any jinxes on it, but all I'll say is this is very exciting, and I think this is going to be a hockey season to remember in a lot of ways. But I think almost everybody in this league is excited for Ovi to have the chance to do something that was once thought impossible.
Well, and the people I truly feel bad for in this situation are people once he's close to breaking the record, like really close. I'm talking within 5 goals. The people who are going to pay for tickets to see the game that he's at, whether they're on the road or at home, those ticket prices are going to skyrocket.
And it's going to suck if you're not at the game he does it, because then it'll just be money gone.
Well, that's exactly it.
I shouldn't say that, because you still get to go to a hockey game and watch one of the greats of all time. But I think the message is the same. It's like you want to be at the game where he does it too. You won't lose sleep over getting to watch him play, but you want to be at the game where he does it.
Well, here's one thing I do want to say. I think once he's close, I think they're not going to care where he ties it, but I think given the chance, they're going to make sure he breaks it at home.
Given the chance, potentially. I don't I don't know. It doesn't seem he's not the kind of guy that's going to want to sit out. He's going to want to break this as soon as he can because nothing in life is guaranteed. I think we all learned this last offseason that life's precious and that you never take anything for granted. So obviously they want it and he would like to break it at home. I don't envision him sitting out any games to do it. I would be stunned if he did, and maybe in what is it? Essentially January, maybe 4 months from now, when he is hopefully already broken it, we'll have a different discussion. But I don't think first of all, I hope it just lines up that he does it at home. I hope they're on like a 4-game homestand and there's no doubt about it. But I don't envision him being the type of guy to sit. I think he wants to do it whenever he can. And in fact, come to think of it, I believe when Wayne Gretzky broke the Gordie Howe's record and became the all-time goals leader, I think he did it on the road too.
Oh, really?
I'm almost certain he did.
Huh.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I envision him being in the Black Kings uniform when he did it. And back in the day, your dark uniforms were the ones you wore on the road. I want to say he did it on the road against the Oilers, which is ironic.
Yeah, that's ironic as shit. Yeah.
But yeah, I might have some of the details mixed up, but I'm almost certain he did it on the road. I don't think Ovi's the kind of guy that'll sit out and miss the All-Star game. He's not the kind of guy that's going to sit out and miss a game that counts.
Yeah, well,
especially given the position that the Capitals are in. There's a good chance that late in the season they might be fighting for a higher seeded playoff position to get home ice advantage for the playoffs. So he's not a guy that strikes me as somebody who's going to want to sit out if he can avoid it.
One thing that will for sure happen once he's very close is the Capitals are about to pick up some unplanned for nationally televised games. So,
yep.
Because there's just no way that doesn't go on national TV.
Oh, yeah. And if they put it on the NHL network, we riot.
Absolutely.
Way, we talked about Sid being a point-a-game player at 37. How about Alex Ovechkin being a point-a-game player at 39 years old? 27 points in 20 games. 17 goals, 10 assists. He's a plus 16. He's done a lot of his damage this year off of the power play, ironically. Look, he's defying time too, and he probably has a little bit more of a drive to be performing this well given the record he's chasing, but it's still very impressive that a guy at 39 years old is scoring at a point a game clip, and he's almost scoring at a goal a game. I mean, he's 17 goals in 20 games. That's an incredible.
Yeah,
those are any other player in the league does that. We're like, this guy's the best player ever. Look at Matthews last year scores. But they have 69 goals last year. Yep. 69 goals in 82 or 80 games or whatever it was that he played last year. That's unbelievable. That's so stupid.
It is.
So for Ovi to be doing this at 39, I mean, any other guy does this and we're blown away. And again, not to take away anything away from Ovi, he's very likely going to be the all-time goals leader when this is all said and done. But to be doing this at 39, I think we gave a lot of credit to Sid, and I think we need to kind of give the same credit to Ovi because he's doing the same thing at an older age with arguably a worse team. I don't really know how to put it because the Capitals are playing so well right now. Just on paper, it kind of doesn't make sense, but it's working. So I don't want to call them a worse team because statistically they aren't.
No, but on paper,
you look at Crosby's supporting cast, and yeah, it certainly seems that way. But you know what? It's working for Ovi, and it's working for Sid in Pittsburgh as far as the scoring goes. So let's just not have them change anything. This seems to be working for both guys. Let's let Sid chase his franchise points record in Pittsburgh and maybe another cup, and let's let Ovi chase this goal record, and who knows, potentially a cup for him if Washington keeps this stellar season they have going.
Either way, these guys need to ride off into the sunset in style, and I'm fucking here for it.
I want them so badly to retire at the end of the same season so they can go into the Hall of Fame together because it just feels like it would be right.
Yeah, I agree with you, though. That would, from a fan standpoint, that would suck to see them both go at the same time. But again, yeah, seeing them get inducted.
Oh yeah, it wouldn't be easy when they leave, but watching those Hall of Fame speeches back to back there'd be nothing like it.
Yeah. So, man,
we mentioned, by the way, with McKinnon finally winning his cup and getting that, he hasn't won a cup off his back. Ovi was very much in that same boat until the Capitals finally won it all. I mean, nobody would shut the fuck up that he hadn't won a Stanley Cup ever until he finally did. And now all they talk about is this is one of the greatest players. Well, some guys say he's a power play merchant, but those guys are fucking idiots. So there you go.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a fucking stretch.
Yeah, it's for guys that have takes like that, I just don't even turn your TV on, dude. Just go fucking watch. I don't know. Go to the fucking beach. I don't care. You don't watch hockey.
Yeah.
I don't want to dog on other sports by telling them to go watch those, but yeah, it's
Go watch
Ovi's an
figure
incredible
skating.
player, and as it sits, like we mentioned, 24 goals away from tying Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. Of course, 25 away from breaking it, and so now he's healthy for the time being. I think we all just cross our fingers and wait a couple more months and see where Ovi takes us.
And enjoy the ride.
All right. And with that, let's move on to our final segment here. I kind of want to do a year in review for both of us.
Yeah.
This has been a crazy ass year in our lives with this podcast and just with everything in general. I guess I'll talk about kind of what happened with me first, and then you can kind of share any details from your life as well that you're comfortable sharing. I guess we'll start with the podcast because here we are. We started talking about this at the end of last January, or I guess technically still this January, but at the end of January, we were just kind of joking about it one night, and you were the one that was just like, well, why don't we fucking do this then? We've talked about it 100 times. Why don't we do this? And so we took a shot. It took us a couple hours to come up with a name that wasn't already either taken or wasn't shitty. And we put this show together, and we've made a lot of good friends along the way. And I've enjoyed doing this a lot. We hope to be back on video before too long, but we've had a lot of fun video calls with our guests. We've met a lot of amazing people doing this. We've learned quite a bit doing this as well. I think you realize how hard analysts and stuff have it when they have to do this for a living and they have to be glued to all these games. It's amazing how they can keep up with this. We have the luxury of doing it once a week. We tried doing it twice a week, and even that was too chaotic for us.
Yeah, that was a lot. And I mean, if we had fucking, hundreds of thousands of listeners every episode, we'd be doing 2 a week still. But I mean, we're already bigger than we ever expected to be. And I'm very grateful for that. And so I'm comfortable with where we are right now.
Yep. I am too. And so this show kind of, I don't want to say it revitalized my love for hockey, but it further added to it. During the COVID seasons, it was kind of hard to really enjoy anything. I was just glad to be alive, and that my wife and I were both in good health. And so I didn't watch a ton of hockey, but at the end of the 21 season, I was like, I got to get my shit back together and start watching more of these games. I would watch maybe 1 game a week, 2 games a week. And then I was like, I really got to get back into this. So I did. And this year was really amplified. I felt like I watched a ton of games, was watching 2, 3, 4 games a night during the playoffs, or at least during that opening round when it's just a chaotic frenzy for a couple weeks. And I felt like my love for this game was just further extended by doing this show and, kind of forcing myself to follow even deeper than I already was. And so that part of it was great. On the personal end of my life, obviously my wife and I moved 6 hours away from home, kind of loving our life where it's at right now, but there was a lot of stress involved with that. I didn't want to really leave my old job that badly back home in Wisconsin, but I obviously had to move out of state. And so there was a lot of emotion saying goodbye to our very close family, and we have some incredible friends. And so as tough as that's been, I think this year as a whole, at least for me, has been just really good. We've made a lot of good friends. I've learned a lot of stuff about myself. I feel like my marriage got stronger. I feel like as chaotic as this year has been, I think I can close the book on it feeling really, really good about it, all things said and done.
Yeah, I think that was well said. I think from your point about the podcast, the first thing I want to say is, this, when we started this, we started it on a whim, and it was never supposed to really develop into anything. It was more or less just, we spent so much time on the phone talking about hockey every day. I was like, why are we not just doing a podcast? And even if we only get 10 people to listen to us, who gives a shit? It gives us something to do. And, it's hockey. And And now here we are getting a few thousand listeners every week, and that's still insanity to me because I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we're nobody. We're just two guys, two brothers who are way too over obsessed with hockey and had to find a way to channel it as not to annoy everybody else who doesn't want to hear about it. And it's just been like Brian, like you said, the people we've gotten to meet doing this have just been incredible. I mean, we got a really good partnership with Xenopucks going. They're great. Got somewhat indirectly involved with the Warrior for Life Fund, so that's been really nice. And we've had some really cool guests on this show. It's far exceeded my expectations, and it's been extremely fun, and I'm looking forward to what the future holds. But I think ultimately this just, without the audience, this just wouldn't be what it is. And I'm grateful to every single person who tunes in every week to listen to the show. Even if you've only listened to the show once, I'm still grateful because whether it's once or if you're a regular listener, it still helps us. And that means the world to me, especially like I mentioned earlier, for two guys who didn't know what the hell they were doing when we got into this podcast thing. On the personal side of things, I did not move anywhere, although I did help you.
You and your wife were very instrumental in our move. I can't thank you guys enough. My wife and I, it was enough for us to pack up our entire lives and ship out of Wisconsin. But you and your wife went to the ends of the earth to help us, and it made our lives drastically easier than it otherwise would have been. So we appreciate you guys both, and we love you both very much.
And that's what family does, man. Well, this is what good family does.
Yep.
So, but I mean, I was excited about that. We've gotten to go to some hockey games together again, which is that's been really nice. So, but other than that, I mean, it was kind of a mellow year for me. I was so busy with my actual job this year that, we just, the year kind of blew by for me. I mean, we took a trip out to California at the beginning of the year, which I think I had mentioned on here because we had been doing this podcast by that point. We were still very early in the podcast at that point. We had a couple trips here and there, but I mean, the year kind of blew by. It was a busier year as far as work goes. So, that being said, it wasn't a bad year by any stretch. It was a pretty good year. Panthers won the Stanley Cup. I think that's the highlight of the year for my wife and I. That was a blast to watch that playoff run, and I was even more proud because I predicted it a few months beforehand on this show. So that was really fun, and I'm looking forward to see what 2025 holds. We got some traveling to do once again, and I'm looking forward to see what's in store for this show as well.
Fair enough. Quick aside, when the Panthers won the Stanley Cup, I remember this dude, well, you, telling me that I would never cry if my team won won a championship. After the Panthers won the Stanley Cup, maybe 5-10 minutes after the final horn, Andrew FaceTimes me and two of our closest friends, and we all pick up the phone, and Andrew, you can still see the streams on his cheeks from the tears because he cried so much after they won, which I want to say nothing wrong with that. That's what I would expect a normal fan to do. I just found it hilarious that you were so sure that you wouldn't, and you couldn't even keep yourself together on the phone.
Well, like I didn't do that when the Packers won the Super Bowl in 2011.
That is fair.
So I just, and you know what? I don't know. It just,
that's because you don't actually like the Packers. I knew it.
Okay. I was so happy for the Panthers, especially because of the way the season ended, the prior season ended for them. When I think had they not been banged up, that would have been a much closer final against Vegas.
Yeah.
But I remember my wife and I had been watching them and going to their games since they were talking about relocating the team, and they couldn't even get 5,000 people in that fucking arena on a Saturday night. Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, that was how we started going. Was we originally went there to see a Bruins Panthers game so we could see the Bruins, and the tickets were so dirt cheap, and there were so many Bruins fans there, and it's actually a really nice arena too. And my wife and I were like, "Well, this arena is really nice. The tickets were dirt cheap. maybe we should start going to Panthers games. We only lived 2 hours away at the time. And so we did, and we just slowly, unintentionally became Panthers fans just from going to the games. And just to see them come from where they were, which was a damn near a poverty franchise, to Stanley Cup champions, I think that's why it was so emotional. And it was all pride. I was just so proud of that team.
Yeah, that's fair. And the Packers were good your whole life, so you expected them to.
Yeah,
you expect the good out of them.
Yeah, and with the Packers, it was like they should have had way more Super Bowls than they do. But that's a different sport and a different topic.
For a non-football show, I think we're 3 or 4 episodes in a row where we've at least mentioned football.
Well, we're allowed to like other sports too.
No, we're not. No, we aren't. We only like hockey. I'm just kidding. I just don't want to like the other sports because all my other teams suck. Actually, I shouldn't say that. The Bucks won an NBA championship, so I shouldn't say all of them. But the baseball and football are sore subjects for me.
Before we either continue talking about our year in review or end the show, whichever you'd like to do, there is one shout out I'd like to give. I promised said individual that I would.
Go for it.
And so this is the one. There is a new podcast in town right now. If you are a baseball fan or just a lover of the sport in general, check out the Full Count Everything Baseball podcast. They just started. 2 guys named Matt and Jake, extremely knowledgeable and passionate about the sport of baseball. Both played baseball their entire lives growing up. Matt played college ball. They both coach traveling ball right now, just extremely knowledgeable. They talk about anything from the MLB all the way down to youth baseball. They are right now available wherever you can get your podcast. And again, that is the Full Count Everything Baseball podcast. Give them a listen, check them out, leave them a review, and tell them that Andy and Brian for Fresh Ice sent you.
There you go. I like it. Although I for myself, again, I wonder if I should listen to a baseball podcast because all I'll hear is that the Brewers owner's cheap and that they'll never be a legitimate contender because of that. But
Well, yeah. Well, again, that's something you and I could talk about for ages too.
It sure is. I couldn't probably do a full baseball podcast. I could do a Milwaukee Brewers ripping them to pieces podcast because they just make me angry.
Yeah, that's been our whole lives as Brewers fans. Just a lifetime of letdowns.
Yeah. So, well, we've kind of just gone off the rails towards the end. So I do think that's a perfect way to wrap it. Real quick, if you're watching the Winter Classic tomorrow night, enjoy it. Blues Blackhawks at Wrigley Field should be pretty cool sight to see. I know the Blackhawks are obviously terrible and the Blues are not great, but you know what? It's an outdoor game. It'll be cool. It's at a historic site. I don't know if that's just because they're divisional rivals that I had to dump on them both so bad or because they both just suck, but I felt that was necessary. But
he's like, well, the Blackhawks suck and the Blues are not great. So.
This was one that they very obviously did just for the ratings because neither of these teams are very good, but it is what it is. We've had discussions before that they should maybe alter some of these teams, but that's beside the point. We're going to an outdoor game in a couple months.
Yes, we are.
But those of you watching or even going to the Winter Classic tomorrow, enjoy it. If you're going to be there, be safe. That area in Chicago is nuts, as are most parts of Chicago. So enjoy it, and we will talk to you guys next year.